So how about this? There are rising tensions between North and South Korea. The South slamming new sanctions on North Korea over its recent nuclear test and rocket launch. It also comes amid allegations that North Korea hacked into the smartphones of dozens of key South Korean officials, which of course they didn't like, stealing text messages, voice messages, and phone call logs, according to the reports. John Bolton is former U.S. ambassador to the UN, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, good morning. Good to have you here. So there's so much focus on the election. You and I were even talking about it in the break before this segment, but the fact of the matter is that we need to pay attention to what's going on in some of these hotspots around the world. Why should everybody understand what's happening in North Korea?
Well, this is very serious, not necessarily because there's going to be an outbreak of hostilities tomorrow, but because this attitude that North Korea is displaying, really disdain for the UN sanctions and continuing to make the kinds of threats that it's famous for on the Korean Peninsula, is increasingly getting a capability to miniaturize its nuclear devices and to put them on ballistic missiles that are gaining the range to hit targets in the west coast of the United States in the near future. Our U.S. Commander of Forces in Korea has said that. South Korean defense people believe that. And unfortunately, for 7 years, North Korea has almost been off our radar screen.
Yeah, so I mean, if they're able to do that, to miniaturize those weapons in a way that actually could threaten the United States, how can we stop them?
Well, bearing in mind the regime is irrational from our point of view, and that's one reason why you think they can't be serious. Well, in their twisted view of the world, you better take them seriously. I think the only long-term answer here is to convince China that it has to abandon the schizophrenic contradictory policy it's pursued. China says they don't want North Korea with nuclear weapons. I actually take them at their word. But they have not taken the steps that they uniquely can take to make the North Korean regime back off this. And there's one other threat element here as well. We know that at least since 1998, North Korea and Iran have cooperated on their ballistic missile programs. There's really every reason to believe that they're cooperating on the nuclear programs, too. So the axis of evil is not just a literary metaphor. We think we've got a deal with Iran, signed in Vienna this summer, to stop their nuclear program. Don't count on it.
Kim Jong-un, how different are we learning he is from his predecessors? Because it used to be that they would, sort of fire off a missile or test something they weren't supposed to test, and then they'd get a lot of aid, and that would back them down, and they'd come down for a little bit. He a different guy?
Well, I think in some senses he may be worse. Number one, he's younger at the time he's assumed power. At least his grandfather went through a hard guerrilla warfare kind of campaign. He had some degree of realism. But I think Kim Jong-un is so divorced from reality. He's living in such a protected bubble in North Korea, unlike all of his people who live in abject poverty, that I really think his lack of understanding of the wider world it really increases the risk of an irrational action on their part. So I think in South Korea, Japan especially, they're very worried about this increased nuclear threat. They could be targets, and given missile ranges, they could be targets before we are. And I just think it's a mistake because to think that because things aren't happening that we can ignore North Korea. I think it's a big mistake.
Yeah. It's tough when Dennis Rodman is your window to the rest of the world.
That's certainly true.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Good to see you.
So